They say Buckingham Palace runs on silence, but in early 2026, that silence didn't just crack, it exploded. What began as a faint murmur somewhere far from London quickly escalated into a full-scale narrative war, echoing through royal corridors and beyond. For years, the public has been told a polished version of how the Duke and Duchess of Sussex came to be, a modern love story sparked by a digital connection. But now, a very different storyline is resurfacing, one that trades fairy tale charm for something far more complicated. This retelling doesn't start in London or Los Angeles. It begins offshore, on luxury yachts drifting through the Mediterranean, where the guest lists are guarded, the stakes are high, and reputations are currency. Long before royal titles entered the picture, Meghan Markle was building a career in an industry where connections matter as much as talent. And according to persistent rumours now gaining renewed traction, some of those connections were formed in elite social circles far removed from Hollywood casting calls. Images from years past, taken in places like Saint-Tropez, Ibiza, and along the Amalfi Coast, are being revisited with a new lens. What once looked like snapshots of a rising actress enjoying success are now being reframed by critics as something more strategic. The suggestion, pushed by certain commentators, is that these appearances weren't purely social, but part of a calculated effort to move within influential circles. It's a claim that remains unproven, but in today's climate, perception often travels faster than verification. The conversation intensified when voices from the financial world began weighing in. Figures known for their commentary on elite culture pointed to alleged digital trails and connections that challenged the widely accepted origin story of Meghan and Harry's relationship. Instead of a simple introduction via mutual friends or social media, some now argue that Meghan had already spent years navigating high-powered international networks, long before crossing paths with a British prince. If that interpretation holds any truth, it shifts the narrative significantly. It paints a picture not of chance, but of experience, of someone already familiar with the rhythms of wealth, influence, and discretion. For Prince Harry, who publicly framed their relationship as a protective mission against an intrusive system, this alternative version raises uncomfortable questions. Was he stepping into Meghan's world just as much as she was entering his? Then, just as speculation was building, a familiar royal figure re-entered the conversation: Sarah Ferguson. Known for her unpredictability and long history with both scandal and survival, Ferguson reportedly made remarks that reignited scrutiny. By drawing a controversial connection between Meghan and circles linked to Prince Andrew, she didn't just add fuel to the fire, she shifted the focus entirely. Whether intentional or not, the timing was striking. As attention once again circled around Andrew's past associations, a fresh wave of headlines began centering on Meghan. For observers, it looked less like coincidence and more like a redirection. In royal dynamics, narratives rarely move without purpose, and those who understand the system know how to steer attention when necessary. What makes this moment particularly volatile is the overlap of reputations. Any mention of elite social circles inevitably brushes up against the shadow of Jeffrey Epstein, a subject the monarchy has tried, repeatedly, to distance itself from. By placing Meghan and Andrew in the same conversational space, even indirectly, the implications become explosive, regardless of evidence. Meanwhile, Prince Harry is said to be grappling with the resurgence of these claims. Having spent years building a new life and identity outside the monarchy, he now finds himself pulled back into a narrative he cannot fully control. Reports suggest frustration behind closed doors, not just at the media, but at the lack of response, and it was moving quickly. For Meghan, whose public image has been carefully constructed around advocacy and authenticity, At the centre of it all is a growing sense of rivalry, particularly between Meghan and Sarah Ferguson. Both women have lived as outsiders within the royal orbit. Both have faced intense scrutiny, and both understand how narratives can be weaponized. But where Meghan is still building her global identity, Ferguson has little left to lose, and that changes the stakes. Observers describe this phase as a scorched earth moment. Ferguson, having spent decades managing her own controversies, appears willing to challenge the carefully curated image of the Sussex brand. Whether driven by personal motive or broader strategy, her involvement has added a new layer of unpredictability. As this unfolds, the Sussexes' planned engagements, particularly international appearances, are facing increased scrutiny. Public reaction, especially in regions like Australia, has reportedly become more critical, with protests and commentary reflecting a shift in tone. What was once a platform for influence is now a stage for confrontation. At the same time, the digital landscape is evolving in ways that make reputation management even more complex. Advances in AI-generated content and hyper-realistic visual media are blurring the line between fact and fabrication. In this environment, perception can be shaped not just by words, but by images that feel authentic, even when they're not. For the monarchy, the situation presents a strategic dilemma. Intervening risks drawing more attention, but staying Sussex's personal history. For Harry and Meghan, that would mark a turning point. It would mean facing the current wave of scrutiny without institutional backing. Movements are already being made. Meghan is said to be focusing more heavily on humanitarian work, shifting attention away from personal narratives. Harry, meanwhile, inside palace walls, however, the response remains unchanged. Silence. Not because there's nothing to say, but because, historically, silence has often been the monarchy's most effective tool. What happens next depends on how this narrative evolves and who controls it. Because in this world, stories aren't just told, they're shaped, timed, and, when necessary, weaponized. And the biggest question still lingers: when everything is said and done, which version of the story will the world choose to believe?